In football, some players are born for greatness, while others are consumed by it too soon. In 1982, a 16-year-old boy walked onto the World Cup stage, shattering records and rewriting history. He wasn't just a promising youngster, he was a phenomenon, a player who had the touch of a veteran, the vision of a maestro, and the fearlessness of a street footballer. His name? Norman Whiteside. At Manchester United, he was hailed as the next George Best, a force of nature who played as if he had ice in his veins. By 17, he was dominating the FA Cup final. By 18, he was making history with his goals. But behind the brilliance, behind the cheers, there was something lurking, a silent battle with his own body. By 26, it was over. A career that should have lasted decades ended before its time. What went wrong? Was he a victim of reckless overuse, pushed too hard, too fast? Or was his fate sealed the moment he took his first steps onto the grand stage? This is the story of Norman Whiteside, football's lost prodigy, a player who rose too soon and fell too fast. There are teenage prodigies, and then there was Norman Whiteside, a phenomenon who shattered records before he even turned 18. At just 16 years and 356 days old, he became Manchester United's youngest debutant since Duncan Edwards. And within a year, he was rewriting football history. By the summer of 1982, he was not only United's most exciting young talent, but also a World Cup star. Selected for Northern Ireland's squad at just 17, he became the youngest player ever to appear in the tournament, breaking Pellé's record. But Whiteside wasn't just another young hopeful. He was a midfielder with the power of a center forward, the elegance of a playmaker, and a fearlessness that made seasoned professionals take notice. His performances at the World Cup weren't just symbolic, they were exceptional. He bullied defenders twice his age, showed remarkable vision, and played with a maturity far beyond his years. Back at United, he continued his meteoric rise. He became the youngest player to score in a League Cup and FA Cup final, delivering in the biggest moments. In 1983, he played a pivotal role in United's FA Cup triumph, scoring in both the final and the replay against Brighton. His goal in the 1985 FA Cup final, a curling effort past Everton's Neville Southall, became the stuff of legend, sealing United's victory and cementing his place as one of football's most exciting young stars. But with every meteoric rise comes an unseen burden. Whiteside's reckless playing style, the very trait that made him special, would soon become his biggest adversary. He played through pain, dismissed injuries as mere inconveniences, and unknowingly walked down a path that would cut his career tragically short. The question loomed, could he sustain this brilliance, or was he heading toward an inevitable fall? The youngest player to ever appear in a World Cup wasn't just a record breaker, he was a rising force. Norman Whiteside returned from Spain in 1982 with his stock higher than ever, and at Manchester United, the expectations were massive. The club had been longing for a talisman, someone to reignite their dominance. Whiteside, barely out of his teens, stepped into that role effortlessly. He wasn't just a forward, he was a gladiator in the attacking third, tenacious, fearless, and already carrying the weight of a club desperate for glory. Ron Atkinson, the manager at the time, knew he had something special. Whiteside's physicality was beyond his years, and his technical ability made him a nightmare for defenders. The 1982-83 season proved it. He scored crucial goals, including in both the FA Cup semi-final and final, helping United lift the trophy. The following season, he continued his meteoric rise, netting 19 goals and cementing his reputation as one of English football's most exciting young talents. But what made Whiteside truly unique was his versatility. He could play as a striker, attacking midfielder, or even a deep-lying playmaker. Defenders who tried to outmuscle him failed. Those who tried to outrun him quickly realized his intelligence allowed him to be two steps ahead. Whiteside wasn't just playing, he was dominating. Then came the 1985 FA Cup final against Everton, a match that would define his legacy. United were down to 10 men, fighting a relentless Everton side that had steamrolled the league. In extra time, Whiteside produced a moment of genius, cutting inside from the right and curling a stunning left-footed shot past Neville Southall. It was a goal for the ages, securing another FA Cup and etching his name into Manchester United folklore. At just 20 years old, Whiteside had the world at his feet. He was a United hero, a Northern Irish icon, and a player many believed would define the next decade. But football is cruel, and for all his brilliance, the seeds of his downfall had already been sown. Injuries were lurking in the shadows, threatening to rewrite his story before he even reached his peak. Every great footballing story carries a moment when things start to slip, when the dream turns into a battle. For Norman Whiteside, that moment came far too soon. By the mid-80s, he wasn't just a rising star. He was a key figure for both Manchester United and Northern Ireland. But beneath the glory, something was breaking. His body, specifically his knees, was already betraying him. Whiteside had always played like a warrior, throwing himself into tackles and absorbing brutal challenges, but the cost was adding up. Chronic knee issues began limiting his explosiveness, forcing him to adapt his game. He played through pain, relying more on intelligence than athleticism, but there was only so much he could endure. The medical staff at United knew the situation was worsening, but back then, sports science wasn't what it is today. Rest and painkillers became his routine. Surgery loomed, yet Whiteside kept pushing, unwilling to step away from the game he loved. The 1986 World Cup was another testament to his resilience. Despite his injuries, he led Northern Ireland with pride, but the team struggled to replicate their 1982 heroics. Whiteside, still only 21, was already feeling the physical toll of a career that should have still been in its infancy. When he returned to club football, the warning signs became undeniable. Ron Atkinson was sacked, and in came Alex Ferguson, a man determined to rebuild United into a force capable of dominating English football. But Ferguson needed high-energy, physically dominant players to implement his philosophy. Whiteside, once untouchable, now faced an uncertain future. The injuries had slowed him down, and though his technical brilliance remained, Ferguson had doubts about whether he could be the long-term answer for United's midfield. Despite the pain, Whiteside continued to produce flashes of brilliance. He scored vital goals and remained a fan favorite. But the reality was clear. His body wasn't built to withstand the modern game for much longer. He had defied the odds for years, but Ferguson's ruthless rebuild meant there was little room for sentiment. The writing was on the wall. Whiteside's journey at United, once destined for greatness, was now at a crossroads. The club was moving forward, but could he keep up? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. Football can be ruthless. One day you're a hero, the next you're an afterthought. Norman Whiteside learned this the hard way. For years he had carried Manchester United on his back, playing through pain, delivering moments of brilliance. But under Alex Ferguson, the club was changing. Fitness, stamina, and durability became non-negotiable. And for Whiteside, whose knees were already failing him at just 23, the writing was on the wall. Ferguson admired Whiteside's talent, but he had to make tough decisions. The club was moving towards a more physically dominant squad, and Whiteside, despite his undeniable ability, wasn't fitting the mold. In the summer of 1989, after over a decade at United, Whiteside was sold to Everton. For many, it was an unthinkable move. This was a player who had given his youth, his body, and his career to United. Yet he was cast aside, his farewell lacking the fanfare he deserved. At Everton, there was hope for a fresh start. But hope isn't enough when your body is failing you. Whiteside's knee problems worsened, and despite his efforts, he struggled to maintain the levels that once made him unplayable. He still had the vision, the intelligence, the technical brilliance, but he lacked the legs to carry him through a full season. Injuries robbed him of what should have been his prime years. By 1991, the inevitable happened. At just 26 years old, an age where most footballers are hitting their peak, Whiteside was forced to retire. A career that had promised so much was over far too soon. There was no grand farewell, no testimonial at Old Trafford, no proper send-off. Just the harsh reality that his body had given up before he could fulfill the greatness he was destined for. What made it even more painful was the question that lingered. What if? What if he had played in a different era, with modern sports medicine? What if his knees had held up just a few more years? Whiteside had the talent to become one of the all-time greats, but fate had other plans. But was this the end of his story? Or did Whiteside find a new path beyond football? That's where his next chapter begins. When the final whistle blows on a footballer's career, many struggle to find a new purpose. Norman Whiteside was no different. At just 26, he was left with a lifetime ahead of him, but without the game that had defined his existence. He could have faded into obscurity, like so many others who never quite recovered from football's brutal exit. But Whiteside was never one to back down from a challenge. With no option of playing again, he turned to education, something rare for ex-footballers of his generation. He studied to become a podiatrist, specializing in foot and ankle injuries, the very type of issues that had ended his career. It was poetic in a way. Football had taken so much from him, yet he found a way to give back. His understanding of injuries and pain wasn't theoretical, it was lived experience. At the same time, Whiteside embraced his history. He became a football ambassador, sharing stories of his career, engaging with fans, and ensuring his name wasn't forgotten. He wrote an autobiography, laying bare the highs and lows of his journey, giving an unfiltered look into the life of a footballer who had it all, only to have it taken away too soon. Despite the abrupt end to his playing days, his legacy remained intact. He wasn't just a what-if story, he was a symbol of resilience, a teenager who conquered football's biggest stages, who stood toe-to-toe with legends, and who, even when football abandoned him, refused to be defined by tragedy. But in the end, one question remains. Was Norman Whiteside a lost legend? Or was he a player whose brilliance was just too fleeting to be fully appreciated? Football remembers its greats, but sometimes it forgets those who could have been even greater. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to subscribe for more stories of football's most fascinating figures.